This is a Socialist News and Views debate.
I'm Nick Schillingford. My pronouns are he, him, and I am coming to you from the Urban Cabin Studios in South Minneapolis with this debate and discussion. Welcome, everybody. Today's discussion and debate is on guns in America and gun control. Now, earlier this year, we had a debate on how to defeat Trump. Now we're getting into more specific issue-focused debates. And at that last debate, I called for comradely and civil discussion with each other. We want to build a better world for ourselves and our families and other workers. And I vouch for everybody on this debate and discussion wanting that and being motivated to build a better world. Now, today we're talking about guns and gun control. I organized this discussion and debate shortly after the Annunciation shooting, but there was just another shooting here in Minneapolis overnight in Dinkytown. I heard, so it's obviously, continues to be an issue that I think people are going to care about. Now we have a whole new group of folks. Two of the folks were on our first debate of the year, but they weren't on the last one on Trump. And then two others haven't participated yet in a debate on socialist news and views. We let folks introduce themselves. So I'm going to let folks go ahead and introduce themselves. I just did it in alphabetical by last name. David, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, my name's David Boehnke. I'm a organizer and visionary. I work a lot with folks in prison to transform the prison system over the last 12 years in Minnesota, and we've been able to have significant impact there. I've also been a high school teacher and educator for 13 years and been involved in lots of different organizing spaces in Minneapolis.
Thanks, David. Tracy?
Hello, everybody. My name is Tracy. I am from Indianapolis, Indiana. I wear a lot of hats, but the one I will be wearing in January is I will be the state chair of the Justice for All Party. Currently, I am trying to get a group together to stop Braun. That's what the group is called, because our governor definitely does not deserve the second term, and we want to organize now instead of waiting close to the election. So glad I was invited.
Thanks, Tracy. Sam?
Hey everyone, I'm Sam Collins. I am a local midwife here in Minneapolis. I serve a 75-minute radius from the Twin Cities, so I go all over. So both urban and rural, which is an interesting bag of people that I serve. In the context of this conversation, I'm also a mother. I was raised without guns in my home and now currently do have guns in my home as an adult. So
interesting.
Thank you. Penelope?
Hi, I'm Penelope Mace, and hello to everyone, and thank you, certainly, Nick, for inviting me back again to one of these. They're always interesting. I no longer work for money. I have aged out of that. Sort of, but I do live down in a small town, Winona, Minnesota, which is down in the southeast, which is very different from places where I've lived in the past. Very different atmosphere, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of getting me into a little trouble here and there. But I was what they call a red diaper baby. I was raised by old commies, and so just kind of absorbed a class analysis and Marxism and all that stuff with my pablum. It's just kind of natural to me. And I have worked on all sorts of things over the years, including actually, I worked on a group called the Prisoners Solidarity Committee in the early 70s, and that which came out of the Attica Uprising, and used to visit prisoners in Maximum and in Ad Seg in New Jersey. But right now, sort of trying to find people here in Winona. I found a few, like sort of progressive people trying to work on various causes, and I'm trying to get on the school board DEI committee. So that might be interesting. I haven't heard from them yet. So I'm glad to be here.
Nice. Thanks, Penelope. Yeah, I wanted to start from the end of last month's debate and discussion. I think, and like I said, nobody here was involved in that one, but like the ending point of that was just talking about, kind of fitting into the fascist, small-minded world, the right wing's kind of like very small, insular world. And the one thing I've noticed is some disagreement about, what the far right wants. Now, some seem to say that, gun violence and chaos and things going crazy, that's what they really want in this country. And other people seem to say that, the fascists are ready at the first opportunity to take everyone's guns away. And Donald Trump even floated the idea of banning guns specifically for transgender people. I believe the NRA actually came out against that, which some people were surprised by. Waltz here in Minnesota, our governor Waltz has been talking about calling a special session to talk about guns, but it sounds like he's kind of moving away from that. And now the Democrats are going on a little loop, doing little town halls about guns. You think it's a possibility that coming up here they will look at banning guns for certain groups or certain kinds of guns? Is that even a possibility? Does anybody have any ideas? I know that was something that came up when I originally had this discussion on Facebook. Is it possible to significantly ban guns in the United States? Anybody want to jump in on that one? A lot of people seem to think it wasn't even a possibility, that it wouldn't even, pass muster, so to speak, and that it wouldn't even get a hearing, which kind of seems to be the case, given that the special session seems to be getting rolled back.
Mm.
I think that it definitely could be a possibility in the right context if all the dominoes lined up just right. Specifically, when you look at the history of Europeans taking away gun rights or changing legislation around it, they did that surrounding specific wars, and specifically when they were concerned about social uprisings. And I think that if the government felt threatened by civilians, specifically people that aren't like them, so liberalists, left-wing people, trans people, anyone that is other, then that is a possibility. I just don't understand. What I'm curious about in this panel is how that might be enacted or how that is actually feasible or logistic. But I think at this point, considering with the shutdown of the government, they got other things to be focusing on. People aren't being fed. And, when you think about where we are right now in history, food is sovereignty, and it's always the first power move of a war against your own people is by removing their food. So I'm curious what's going to happen in the next year or two, but I do. So long story short, yes, it's a possibility. Do I think it's a possibility in the next 6 months? No.
Anybody else have thoughts?
I think it would be a tough sell in this country, to get rid of guns. I could see maybe that they could say they could target certain groups. Certainly they've done such a hatchet job on the image of trans people in particular, that they're just now a convenient scapegoat. And so maybe, but as you say, even the NRA has come out against that, no doubt, just because they have a blanket thing,
right,
about guns, I guess, that supersedes even their homophobia, which is interesting. But I think it would be a very hard sell. And I think because this country, you think about other countries, but this country does have a very peculiar relationship with guns. I don't know if it's because of the whole Wild West crap or what it is, but it's very different from other capitalist countries, even places like Canada, where there's certainly a lot of guns, but there's not that flavor to the relationship that there is here. And plus, you can get them illegally and in so many ways that I don't even know, if you try to start banning them, I don't do this, but it's my understanding that it's really pretty easy to get all kinds of guns, not just a little handgun, but all sorts, if you're willing to pay for it. So I think it would be a tough sell. I don't know, I just don't, at this point, though, I'll tell you, the way things have gone with this Trump administration this time, I don't know the answer to anything anymore. Every time I think I kind of know how it's like, then that's all bets are off. It's just so bizarre.
I think a lot of people are feeling that way.
Easy sell.
Oh, yeah? Okay, let's hear.
I do think it would be an easy sell. I'm going to use this as an example. First of all, I'm going to say what I think about guns. They're disgusting. I can't stand up, and I wish we could live in a society that didn't have more guns than people. Say that just so everybody kind of knows where I stand. But I think about what happened when the Black Panthers in the 80s, when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, and what he did, and how easy that was for him to do it. Those were legal gun owners. And Ronald Reagan all of a sudden decided, you know what we need? Gun control laws. I think it would be the easiest sell. And I'll say this, if this country wanted gun reform, the easiest way Republicans could steer is if every Black person went and became a registered gun owner. Automatically would pass. Automatically. Because it's I don't like to bring racism into everything, but since I'm the color that I am, I have to. This would be such an easy sell. All you have to do is convince Americans that the drug dealers have guns and they're killing children, especially with the food crisis. If people start using weapons to rob places, this would be an easy sell.
Yeah.
I wish it were hard, but I'm thinking no, this would be so easy because the American people are so they're just so easy to believe blips and clips and not do the research behind it. Yeah, this would be an easy sell.
Yeah. I don't think it would be easy sell, but I can see what you're saying, Miss Tracy. I think that targeting an internal enemy and saying that they are not citizens in the same way is how you would do that. Certainly to see Ronald Reagan in the 70s, advocate gun control for the Black Panthers. He was one of the most public conservative figures in the country at the time. I think is a really good example. I think also what people have been talking about in terms of Antifa and the way in which that can then be reapplied to anyone. And if Antifa is a terrorist organization, then terrorist organizations should not have guns. So I think there is definitely a path towards that. I think the other thing that's pretty important is that there's a lot of folks who are not on the right who have more pro-gun sentiment, and there's also people on the right who are not our enemies who are very pro-gun. And so I think it's really important that people left of center think about that and use words that don't give false impressions. Because this whole thing that the Democrats want to take your guns is a fantasy. You know what I mean? There's been no proposals to change the Second Amendment. And, there's been certainly goals to make cities safer, to make, access differently, to require licensing. But I think, it might be helpful to think about what language we use. I don't know if that's gun safety instead of gun control. I don't know if that's gun violence prevention, like the statewide gun violence prevention group here does. But I think, we also don't want to give people the wrong impression, even though I personally, I'm not a fan of guns, but I think probably a lot of more people on our side of the kind of fence should have them at this point. So, it's a whole thing for sure. But I think what the far right wants, like if we're going to end democracy, what they want is power, right? And so it's not a question of whether they have a position on guns, it's whether they have a position on power and what is it going to take to get power, which is why they can simultaneously say the Democrats are coming for your guns and transgender people shouldn't have them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's not a coherent, contradiction is allowed. The point is to seize power, and the point, like you're saying, Miss Tracy, is to get people confused and upset and following the leader.
Any responses to that? I was going to throw out one other thing, but well, what about, you mentioned the different wording or how to get people to buy into it. What about specific, because this is what has been getting brought up. I think Gabby Giffords actually was with Waltz at one of these events I saw and was talking about like a so-called assault weapons ban, which I know proponents of people that are opposed to that, actually, they really hate that when they say assault weapons ban. I still haven't fully figured all that out, but here's one example. So Penelope talked about the U.S. and then Canada has guns. in Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine. If you go way back to that time, he talks to one of the brothers that was involved in the Oklahoma City bombing, potentially didn't actually get convicted, and he was talking about should you be able to have whatever weapons you want, and he said, oh yeah, whatever. He says, so should you be able to have a thermonuclear warhead? And he said, well, no, there's some crazy people out there, you got to be careful. And so, there's always some kind of weapons control in this country. It's just a case of like what weapons are, restricted or not. Does anybody think like a more scaled back version or some kind of specific thing would be more, you think that's getting into the weeds more, or do you think that's more likely to pass? Anybody have thoughts on that?
I think I can't understand why people want militarized style weapons. What are you doing with them? Like, I can, even though, again, I detest guns. I don't have guns. I don't like them. I don't like touching them. I can see, okay, you have a handgun to protect your home, maybe a rifle if you're a hunter. What do you need with a militarized style? What are you doing with it? I don't understand why this hasn't happened. The law should be very simple. If the military uses it, you can't. Period. You don't need it. What are you defending against? What fear do you have that you had to figure out, you know what? Let me just get an AK-47. No, what are you a handgun will do is sufficient. As much as I hate to say that, because again, I don't own guns. I never plan on owning a gun. But I don't know what makes people think, oh yeah, let me just go get this weapon that's only used in the military. I guess that's what I don't understand. Like why people think they need that. It blows my mind. And maybe somebody that is on the right or more pro gun can explain that to me, because I'm like, what is it that you're using it for?
They're using it to protect their rights. That's their mindset. I'm not
right.
They are concerned that somebody will take something from them. It is based on fear that their basic needs will be taken from them and that they need to defend themselves with something to physically harm you. Because there is, like you said, there is no reasons for that. There's only one reason. You are to shoot, you're to kill, you are to do a mass shooting for something or something that you feel strongly about. So either you're mentally unwell, and like we see with these mass shootings at schools, or you're keeping it to bear arms in your home. And I'm not saying I agree with it, but that is their thoughts.
That doesn't make, that doesn't make sense to me, because I'm like, what is it that you have? Most Americans are living paycheck to pay. What am I protecting? I have nothing. Okay, you want my house? Okay, take it. It's just, you want to steal my computer? Okay, take it. I'll get another one. You don't have anything. What are you talking? I guess I'm not understanding.
I just think there's multiple things going on at the same time, and I think they can all be true at once. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes we have to challenge ourselves to understand that, like, so for example, like, I very strongly believe the kind of idea that gun violence is a public health issue mostly in our society, right? And if you have, the more access you have to guns and the more gun violence and other violence that's going on, the more violence you're going to have. Danielle Surratt, who talks about transforming the prison system and is a restorative justice advocate, talks about, the causes of violence being shame, isolation, inability to meet one's economic needs, and exposure to violence. And how our prison systems and our criminal justice systems create these things that create more violence. So I think, and if you look at, violence interrupters or some of the intentional interventions that have happened in Richmond, California, or in Chicago or elsewhere, they've been very effective in St. Paul now. So, I think we can and should treat violence as a public health issue. I think there's also the fact that people who want to change society need to think about their safety. For how many years was Martin Luther King guarded by armed people? the whole civil rights movement in the South, and in fact, voting in the South only happened because people started having armed self-defense groups to make sure that the KKK couldn't just kill people whenever they wanted to. And once that happened, the KKK basically stopped killing people because they didn't for being bullies, basically. And so, and I think it's worth looking at, for example, the Deacons for Defense and Justice in the South. Sorry, am I frozen, y'all?
Yep.
You are, yeah.
But not
Your
your
images.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
We
it's
can
better
hear
now.
you.
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet's
you're
acting a little tricky. But so, for example, like the Deacons for Defense and Justice in the South, they guarded all these big marches, they guarded key people. But to be in the Deacons for Defense and Justice, you had to be a father, you had to be a veteran, and you had to have a very specific military grade rifle. So, I think when we're talking about protecting our people and protecting our movement, we need to be very careful about who is doing that and who has access to guns and who, are we having hotheads with guns? Are we having people who are actually being strategic about what's going on? And I think that's really important. And that's clearly been essential. I know people personally who have had Nazis come to their homes, and having guns was the reason why the Nazis did not kill them. I mean, that's simply reality in the present, unfortunately. And then I think there are bigger picture things like Sam was talking about, where what happens if we have a dictatorship, which is clearly a goal of the current administration? What happens if we have a reversion to something like Jim Crow 2.0? You know what I mean? What happens also if we have some kind of, Civil War adjacent or Civil War in actuality type situation? You know what I mean? And I think it is legitimate to think about that. Also, even just in Minneapolis, when we had the George Floyd uprising, there was whole neighborhoods who created security patrols to make sure that their neighborhoods were safe. And, again, that was good that they did that. And, I'm sure there was some lessons from that too, but I just think, there can be multiple overlapping contexts. And in the historical moment we're in, I don't think we can expect things to stay the same over the next 20 years. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't think we can just be like, we're going to take a public health approach and we're just going to make things safer that way. I don't think that's the only approach we can take because there's too many other things going on at the same time, unfortunately. I wish that's not the world we lived in, but, and that's also the perspective at which I think it does make sense. At each of those things, disorder, political protection, significant transformation, and also just, public health stuff in our neighborhoods. So it's a lot of different things at once.
I'll just jump in. I was gonna this is kind of on the essentially on the self-protection piece, talking about the Annunciation shooter again. I had a friend, and I won't name who, but they had written that the Annunciation shooter wrote in her notes that she was planning to shoot up an underground music venue in Minneapolis that was frequented by trans people, but that she decided not to because trans people often arm themselves for self-defense. So it seemed too risky. And then they said, guns save trans lives. It's right there in black and white, end quote. Does that miss something, or is that right on? Or
well, if it's true, it's very interesting. I saw that in your notes, and I thought that was very interesting. I guess that surprises me a little bit. I have not known any trans people very well. I have known some, as sort of, I volunteered at Planned Parenthood, and I've volunteered with a few people that, like once I got to know them, revealed to me that they were trans. I didn't even know when I met them. But at any rate, I guess it surprises me a little bit, but what the heck? Look, and yeah, while people were speaking, I was thinking, back to the old days of the left when I was younger and I was in the New Left, and I'll tell you, yes, the Black Panthers, yes, they were very open about about that whole weapons thing, and I was totally in support of them at the time, and I still am. There are these things. I tried to research it, but I couldn't find much. These Huey Newton gun clubs,
right,
which are around, and I don't know what. I know they're supposed to teach, they're to teach Black people how to shoot guns. I suppose that's the main idea or whatever, but I don't really know what other things they do or much about them. But yes, I am not opposed to someone having a gun in their home if they're a political activist and they feel threatened. We did the one collective that I lived with and worked with in Wilmington, Delaware. We went out finally and got one. Well, one of our members just went home and got one because he had one as he grew up hunting and had all sorts of guns in the home, and he just brought one to our because we did have weirdos parking outside our house. We had the crank calls, we had the hate mail, some really bad stuff. And so we got scared because we had this rambly old house that security was a joke in. And, it was hard to sleep at night sometimes thinking about this crap. And this was in Delaware, which let me tell you was a very southern state. Delaware had a very active Klan, back in the old days. And you go 5 miles south of where the University of Delaware is, and you are in the South, the deep South. It's always been that way. So I don't, and I'm not comfortable personally with it. I mean, we all sort of we're supposed to learn how to operate this gun we had. I was never comfortable with it. I didn't grow up around guns. I don't think I'd be very good with one. I always joke that, when the revolution gets here, I'll be in the medics corps. That's my background is healthcare. I don't, so I don't want one personally, but I don't blame anyone else who wants one. And I think that, basically our position as lefties should be to resist any attempts of the government to disarm people. And I think it's the kind of thing, yeah, there's a certain amount of right wingers who if the Trump people said, well, we got to disarm these crazy trans people, they might go along with it. But then it's just like the stuff with deportations and all the other things. They're going to, when it comes to them, they're going to say, wait a minute, I didn't mean me. No, not me. No, you can't deport my Guatemalan girlfriend. No, she's okay,
Right.
kind of thing. So I don't know. I mean, how it would go down, but I think that if it comes down to it, we should support the right of people to have guns. Certainly we can limit the type of guns. Yes, I agree, with Tracy. Why does somebody need a damn assault? Well, I don't know. There's some pretty vicious ducks and pheasants out there. I mean, I don't know, why they want one. It's some kind of a masculine testosterone thing, maybe, or is that sexist? I don't understand it either. Like you say, something for self-defense if you feel threatened or whatever, or even if you like to target shoot. I mean, it's not my thing, but I know there are people who like to do that, or like archery, people who like to do that. But, an assault rifle, a bazooka, yeah, what next? Like you were saying, a nuclear bomb in your basement. I mean, there should be limits on it.
I mean, the thing that's interesting to me is not just when they have like an assault rifle, some kind of an AK-47 or whatever, but it's like when they have like 50 guns. One person has like 50 guns, and I'm like, okay, maybe they're gonna like arm their friends when the revolution comes, but then they don't have any friends either. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess they're gonna have to grow some extra arms or something to fire all these guns. Well, I don't know. Does
I wonder, sorry.
Yeah, no, please.
Sam, you mentioned having a gun in your own home, and yeah, I'm curious if you have thoughts on why that is, or why that's the case, and if that might help inform the kind of conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to explain kind of my story in relationship to guns. I did not grow up with guns. My family never really even discussed guns. I don't think either of my parents were raised around guns. I was interested in I guess protecting myself in the event of like a doomsday prepper when I was in my young 20s. And I took a gun safety class to conceal and carry, but did not end up continuing that process to obtain that license because at the time I was actually mentally very unwell. And I thought if I had a gun in my home, that would be detrimental to myself. And so I didn't go forward with it, but I am partnered with somebody that owns guns and is a hunter. Not a very good one, but a hunter. Don't tell him I said that. And he goes out once a year, and so we have guns, and he was gifted a gun, and we own like 2 or 3 guns. So we have them in our home, and we now have a child together. And so that is something that's the conversation lately of how to keep the gun safe and away from our child. So yeah, we use them for that primary purpose. It is sometimes a relief to me when I think about the world going the way it's going, having guns in my home, specifically to defend it in the event that somebody, I kind of go to these like really drawn out thoughts of like, if there was no more government, if there was no more food, if there was no more water, and somebody came to our house seeking that, I would feel protected by having that.
No, and I hear that, and I also hear what you said about mental health. I know people who've killed themselves with guns. I know people, who've been murdered in domestic violence situations with guns. And so, I think, thinking about who should have access to guns and also like the discernment to know if that's a good thing to have around, I think is a real thing. And then, obviously people mention the school shootings and, I mean, clearly, there's all sorts of people who shouldn't have access as easy as they do. And yeah, again, it's a hard combination there.
Something that I've been thinking of in the context of this, this panel that we were having, somebody was arrested in Bloomington. There was a man that was showcasing his genitals at a Target and was disturbing the peace to women. You might have seen this and whatnot, but he already had a warrant, I think, out. So he was arrested, but then posted bail. So he's out on bail right now until his court starts. But they did find assault rifles in his home. And in those cases, this person's clearly unwell, right? Like he is performing gross acts in public, X, Y, and Z, and has had a prior record. But posting bail while this man or individual has dangerous weapons at home, I just would love to see at a minimum laws placed for this. Like this just seems so ass backwards in my head. Like we have all the red flags that this person is not doing well mentally, but has these at homes, and now you're putting him back in the home where he has access to them. And has this upcoming court case where he might be, that might be a fear base for this person to do something really large. And things like that just really freak me out. And that they don't have the discernment to be like, I'm unwell, I shouldn't have these guns. I was at a place where I could have that. It's just an interesting. It's interesting.
The thing is, though, I agree with you. I'm fine with, saying like if you have a domestic violence conviction or some other kind of assault thing or whatever, let's put, restrictions on what you can possess. But always remember, like I said before, you can get a gun illegally. It's apparently pretty easy, or you can go to a gun show that's, you can mail order these things. Apparently, it's really not that if you go down to the seedy edge of town and ask around, just like you used to do if you wanted marijuana, for heaven's sakes, and now that's legal, as we know. But, you can probably, if you've got the cash and you're willing to do business with really shady customers, I think you can probably get it anyway. And that doesn't negate, I mean, I agree with you, there should be laws. That's something that's going to discourage some people anyway, but it's just so pervasive here. And you go overseas. I used to travel in Europe for my job years ago, and people there, if they get to know you, they kind of just scratch their heads and sort of are like, I mean, it's apparently pretty hard in some countries to even get a gun, and the police don't even routinely carry them. I mean, if you watch BBC mystery shows, they have to go through this whole process, the police, to take a gun on a raid or something. And when they break in, what do they say? Armed police, armed police. I mean, here it's just assumed that police are, armed to the teeth, but that's not true in other places. It's a whole different mindset. So
There's
I
a
don't know what the
country
answer
that
is.
there's a country that you have to have a license to carry pepper spray. I can't remember which one, somewhere in Europe.
Right.
And that just,
Yep.
it's so wild to me living in our society
Yep.
where people often have them on their keychains.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more restrictions. Well, I had we did gun. I think the other time I did something on guns one time was the gun culture perspectives, where people were just giving their perspectives, and the person that I had from Germany was like, I don't get it at all. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't even understand like what the deal is. But I think I think we've agreed on this call so far. Most people have agreed that that they get why certain people or why they themselves would feel like they needed a gun for protection, especially in this country. David was talking about the kind of the public health perspective, which is kind of the perspective I've taken in the past on guns. Once I kind of looked at public data, if people ask me about whether they should get a gun, or like my personal opinion and my professional opinion basically became the same, which was like, if you get a gun, the most likely thing you're going to use it for is to like hurt yourself or somebody in your home, either purposefully or accidentally. So I don't really recommend getting one. But, and I wouldn't get one. But again, people, I think they have, like we mentioned, the right to protect themselves. Just from a public health perspective, without like specifically thinking about, banning guns or doing something that, some in this, would consider very drastic or would go against the Constitution. What are other things that we could do to tackle this whole issue of gun violence that aren't actually like, about guns? Are there other things like, to help stop? I mean, I would imagine there's other things to combat social alienation and to combat, some of the other things that are going on. Do other people have thoughts on that, moving away from the guns piece specifically, how ways to stop these types of shootings or to work on that issue?
I mean, again, there's very effective programs with young people, particularly to pay people who are high risk of participating because they're so around gun violence, to not. And that has dramatically reduced gun violence. I think also, I think we got to think a lot more about patriarchy and about how people are socialized and how we're taught that we can't have emotions and we're supposed to externalize. And I think, I had a student, I was a high school teacher in North Minneapolis for many years, and I had a student who got broken up with and started insulting his girlfriend or back and forth. And then her brother started threatening him, and then he felt like he had to do something or they were going to hurt him. And so he went and shot up the house and he ended up killing a child. The access to gun in that situation is horrible, right? If he didn't have access to a gun, but he was also dealing with other people who had access to guns and felt like he had to have something there. But also, just the kind of, childish shame externalizing, going through a breakup, like these types of situations, like this is, it's just sad. You know what I mean? And again, it comes down to do people have support networks? Do people have people that they can trust and care about? Are people seen as, fully human and supported? What are we doing in our families and communities and schools? And you know what I mean? Like, schools are an education factory, you know what I mean? So, I think there's just lots and lots of levels to how this plays out. And, I think, there's just lots and lots of levels. And I think that, rebuilding community is such a huge part of that. And also, like, you know, that's also kind of a vague solution, right? I think we probably have to have specific and also things that are kind of root cause stuff too.
I think there can be a lot of common sense things to be done, especially at the local level. One of the things, and again, I don't own a gun. My understanding is, well, I'll say it this way. If you have to pass a driver's test to get a license, why don't you have to pass a license test to own a gun? I've never understood this. I don't understand why, I think it's in Indiana, every 6 years, I had to renew my driver's license. I got to go down, take another picture because obviously my appearance has changed. Why can't we have some type of comprehensive gun training, not just you shoot a couple of rounds and, oh, you get a license? No, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why we can't make it like a mandatory, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months at max type of class that you have to take. You have to pass a test. I also think that requiring gun owners to insure their guns is very, very, very important. And then renewing that gun permit. right? Not just get it and then you're done. Like maybe every other year, maybe every 3 years. I don't know what that time would be. That's like you have to renew it. Now, of course, that doesn't negate illegal guns. I don't know how you would crack down on that, but I'm not kind of talking about that right now, because I think that's a whole different issue. But common sense things, background checks, people that have been convicted of domestic violence, to me, have no business owning a gun. They just don't. People that are guilty of child pedophilia, people that are guilty of like violent crimes. And if we're going to do that, I don't know about mental health, because that's a tricky one for me, because I don't know like what recommendations you could have. But I'm also for getting rid of gun shows. I don't understand why I can just go to a gun show. All I gotta do is show my ID and I'm walking away with a gun. No test, no anything, just, okay, you own this gun now. Well, okay. So I think there's some common sense things that we could do to lower it. Obviously, again, you have, and that's just my opinion. And I know people might disagree with it, but I'm like, there should be some type of, at minimum, certification. Like, you have to prove that you can handle this. And a lot of people don't know gun safety. Like, parents aren't teaching their kids, right? They're keeping the ammunition near the gun, which I understand is not the thing you want to do. That you want to keep those things far away. Are we telling our children, hey, this is for protection, not for revenge? This isn't for you to take this gun and go into a school and shoot it up. This is for protection. I think we need to make a minimum age of, I personally am comfortable with 21, but 18 is when if you can die in the military, then obviously you can own a gun. But those are kind of the things that I'm thinking of. But I'm really for you have to insure your weapon. You have to go to an insurance company and say, okay, I want this weapon insured, because what could happen is that weapon is stolen from you, because most people don't know how to use their guns. That gun gets repossessed, used in a crime, and now you're charged with it because it's licensed to use, so that actually protects you. So those are kind of the things that I was thinking of.
I appreciate those sentiments. Parts of me, like, I'm 100% for it, but then there's parts of me that think about people who are less privileged to obtain those certificates, though, and who feel that protecting themselves is a necessary experience, or if they need to hunt or whatever it might be. Let's say this person lives in rural Minnesota, for context of here, and hunts to feed their family, let's say. While that's not most people's experiences living in the society that we do, they can't go purchase all these things. What if they don't have access to a car? What if they don't have, extra funds to purchase all these license or insurances or X, Y, and Z? So parts of me, and I'm just playing it more so as a devil's advocate. I don't really have a right or wrong feelings about it, but parts of me feels strongly about that.
Right. Yeah, I think some of those are good common sense, though, things that Tracy mentioned. And yeah, I guess paying for all this stuff, might be an issue with a few people, but with some people, I don't know. I've lived in rural areas before. I lived in upstate New York for years, and my experience is that not all that many people really hunt for food. I mean, there are a few people who might, do that here and there, but I think it's not that common. And even among the poorer people, I think, it's not usually the case, but yeah, I mean, okay, so access for it in terms of having to buy the licenses and stuff, you could make affordable, try to make it very affordable, which, like with car insurance, it often isn't. But insuring a gun for the same reason, yeah, that you insure the car, in case of something untoward and injury to another person or whatever happens, that there's coverage for that. I think that is common sense. The bigger issue, the one that David mentioned, though, about, males in particular in this society being taught not to, express their feelings. I'm reminded of that quote, and I think it's James Baldwin who said something like this. I can't quote it exactly. Something like, the reason that we are afraid to deal with our anger is because we realize if we get rid of that, we have to deal with the pain. And I think that's so true with a lot of guys. You see that, they punch a wall, when something sad happens to them, rather than sit down and cry, which is more what I would do, or, a lot of women would do, or just express, sadness. And they externalize all of that into anger and rage and revenge and all these things. And that, of course, it's a patriarchy thing, but it's a mental health thing. And we have woefully resources for mental health in this country for regular people who aren't millionaires and can afford to pay a shrink are just, non-existent. And that's always the thing that gets cut, in schools. What gets cut? Counselors, and so on get cut, social workers. We're so in need of that. And that needs to start young. I think if you can start in grade school, middle school with kids, especially boys, being comfortable. I worked in the school systems, a couple different districts up in the Twin Cities as an RN. And in the one, it was the one district that I was in was Wayzata, which is, as you might know, the richest, district in the entire state. And boy, they had lots of counselors and social workers and everything. I had so many kids who would come in the health office and say, I feel sad today. Can you call the counselor for me if she's not in her office? I want to make an appointment. It was a pretty free and open thing for many boys and girls there, which I thought was great. But many places, that's what they're cutting. There's no mental health for anybody. We should have a storefront on every other block, I think everywhere. So an outreach, office with social workers and psychiatric nurses. Those people work cheap, okay? Cheap compared to police or anyone else. And it would go so much farther to preventing violence, and also violence against oneself, as well as the violence against other people. So, but that's a pipe dream. That I don't see that happening anytime soon in this country, any funding for that crap. And if anything, that's going way the other way. That's all, being defunded, and it's just like, oh, that's just liberal, sissy stuff. We don't need that.
Nick, you're muted.
I noticed. Thanks. I'll just say that, on the, since we did talk a little bit more about the gun control piece, another thing that would be interesting that has had some success in the US, but more success overseas, are just like gun buyback programs, I think, could be really successful. At least then I know they say, oh, then you're not getting the guns that are most likely to be involved in the crime, but you're getting a lot. I don't know that that's true. You're getting a lot of guns that people don't want to be responsible for or deal with anymore. And so a lot of times those are the guns that are getting involved in crimes when Penelope's talking about illegal guns or stolen guns or other things like that. People, they just don't want to deal with being responsible for owning the gun anymore, basically. And then it just kind of gets put somewhere and then somebody gets their hands on it. So that's one. And then, I agree with what Penelope was saying. In fact, I've talked about this before. Well, actually, I think David was talking about it at the beginning, is this interpersonal piece, that we really could work on that doesn't have anything to do with guns. I think, having, the resources in the school, but I think, maybe we could create some other resources outside of that, or some third-party entities. But I think really focused on, I had it up here before, really specifically, I actually had a kind of a public safety plan that I had outlined in a speech I'd written that I never actually gave except on this podcast. But the first thing was just talking about reducing poverty and income inequality, which is what we were talking about at the beginning. When people don't have food or they don't have resources, they may come looking for resources, and they may try to take your resources, which of course, at that point you may be in danger. And, so making sure that people have the resources. But then, this huge percentage of violent crime involves people that know each other, from my research. So really it's interpersonal piece that we need to focus on, focusing on in the community on interpersonal communication, conflict de-escalation, trauma-informed care, dealing with the trauma. Obviously, trauma is a big part of that as well. And again, I think, I mean, even conservatives, none of the ones in power, but the ones that you actually meet in real life, I mean, they seem to think that mental health care is a good thing. At least the ones I've come across. But Penelope was also right. Mental health care is really, really broken in this country. You have kids that come in, for example, you're talking about young kids in Minneapolis that come in because they're suicidal or whatever it is. And then they're going to sit in an emergency room for 160 hours or something, like a week sometimes, which is, by the way, not a therapeutic environment in a lot of cases. Even for the other people that are there, and certainly not for the young kids that are spending a week in the emergency room before they even get and then when they get care, it's only like, the immediate care they're getting is like crisis care. They may not even be in an immediate crisis at that point. So yeah, mental health care is really messed up. I think, when I definitely agree, with guns, restrictions on guns for domestic violence, sex crimes against minors and things like this. But I think, when you get into the mental health piece, it can be a little bit of a slippery slope, similar way to, disarming all the people on the left or whatever. Then they say, oh, well, leftism is a mental health disorder. So if you believe that people should have food and shouldn't just be blown up, then you have a mental health condition and you shouldn't own a gun. That's a little bit hyperbole, but only barely in this current modern world we live in. I don't know. Any other thoughts on the gun-based solutions or the community-based solutions, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think with teenagers, and just with our systems in general, like our school system sorts people into winners and losers and successes and failures. And I think that's not something that any parent wants to do with their child. You know what I mean? People don't want to be, oh, like, well, my third child, they're just going to be a failure. You know what I mean? And I think the fact that we don't set up everyone to succeed. And I think also that we don't talk about what is the economy or what is the social structure that we need to make sure that all our kids have a future. I think plays out with a lot of these things. And, I think the other thing is, I think a lot of this violence is basically older men using younger men as pawns. I see that, you see that around gang violence, and I think you also see that around a lot of these politicized shooting, whether it's, incel stuff or white supremacist stuff, where you have older men telling younger men that this is how they be men. So I think there's also a need to, to be present in that way and to have something that we're building and fighting for where people see a future for themselves. I think that that's kind of been off the table too. The kind of liberal side of things, it's like everything's fine, and we know it's not.
Right.
So like, people need to have a future. Sorry, I'm cutting out, so I'm gonna pause for a second here.
No, yeah, I think if you can't see a future for yourself, you're not gonna be doing very good things for other people.
As a midwife, I always have to plug maternal health because I feel like so much can be rooted in the start of growing a family, with the start of reproductive rights, with the start of having autonomy in your birthing choices or your reproductive choices. So I think all that's currently being defunded left and right. Hospital boards are closing, midwives are being cut from programs. There's a variety of things, but it can make a dramatic impact on somebody's well-being if they have, birth choices, affirming choices, to have non-traumatic births. And then that lays a lot of groundwork, especially when you hire a midwife or have a provider that can take the time to go over education topics about parenthood, about milestones, about, do you have access to food? Do you have access to mental health providers? Do you have access to safety in your home? Do you own a gun? That's a question I ask people during intakes. And do you how do you store your gun? Is the ammo stored with the guns? Those are, even while we might not discuss it at length, those are little pivotal moments and maybe make somebody pause. Be like, you know what, actually that is interesting. Or even me just saying, like, as a home birth midwife, like, guns make me uncomfortable if they're unlocked in your home, especially if I know that this person there's some IPV going on. There's a variety of things there.
Anybody else? I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of good things. I think there's definitely some areas of agreement and some areas of disagreement. But I think there's definitely some things that we agree on, like, again, that we kind of understand why people might want to protect themselves, especially given the current world that we're seeing develop. And that, there definitely are things that we could do, both related to the guns themselves and related to just how we develop our society, that could help us. Any other pieces or things that people want to share or add? I feel like this has been a good conversation.
I think, I don't want to say it, I don't understand, but we talk about basically expanding the social safety net, because I think we all understand if jobs are low, if the economy is bad, people are going to resort to stealing or what have you, and they most likely would use a weapon. I wish we could explore more ways of how to get the public engaged in that type of conversation, because I don't really think people understand the connection between food impoverishment and crime, or low economic opportunities in crime. And if we could get the public kind of engaged in that, because we always hear, oh, well, that's just more money on my tax. Although I'm a monetary theory person, everybody isn't, but I understand that people think like that. They think, oh, well, my taxes are going to get raised. I already pay too many taxes, although I would argue we aren't taxed enough, but that's a whole different discussion. I wish we could explore ways, like I said, to engage more like the common person. Because I think sometimes we talk about it especially on the left side, we talk about it as such a, not pie in the sky, but we're so in the clouds in it that we're not bringing it to the people that really need to hear it.
The thing is, too, though, about that tax thing, and you're right, there's two components that I have encountered in other white people. Okay. And I was about this whole thing about, poverty breeds crime. If you want to reduce crime, you got to reduce poverty, kind of thing. These are the kind of stupid ass things that they'll say to you sometimes. It's like, well, you don't need money to know right from wrong. Parents just need to teach kids right from wrong. That's what I do with mine. That's what my parents say. They'll give you that stupid self-righteous speech, which really is a racist speech underneath it, mostly. And they won't admit it if you confront them with it, but it really is. That's number one. But number two, I would love it. I'm not a person that does well with charts and graphs and that kind of stuff. I'm not really a numbers person. I had to take that stuff in school and struggled with it, got through it. But I'd love to come up with something, because, see, it's either pay now or pay later. So either pay now for schools, housing, healthcare, or pay later when those people are criminals and yes, are using a gun and they shoot the 7-Eleven clerk, because they panic or something. And now, oh God, it's a big thing. Now you've got to pay for that. Now, do you know how expensive it is to put someone on trial, convict them, and then how much? And prisons. Yeah, let's talk about prisons. The for-profit prison industry, which is apparently the hot stock, y'all, if you've got 50 grand you want to invest, that's the hot item is for-profit prisons, because people, judges are getting bribed to send people away for stupid little infractions for longer and longer, because they get little kickbacks and everybody's happy except the rest of us,
including
so
sending
really
children away,
sending children away. Oh my
I know,
God,
right?
this is like really, I think one of the few countries in the entire world. And again, I know this from being a little bit of a true crime buff and also from watching British mysteries. You have it's true cases of like a couple of 16-year-old girls who are unhappy with the mother of the one, and so they take her for a walk and bludgeon her to death with a rock. They of course get convicted of it. Do you know how much time they do? They're 16. They both got out in their early 20s. And the only stipulation was they could have no contact with each other ever again. And both of them were given at state expense all new identities, so this wouldn't follow them throughout their lives. And they went on to be okay people. Can you imagine in this country, those kids would either be put to death in Florida or Texas, or, certainly life without parole. Certainly. And people in other countries, again, think we are insane the way we conduct the justice system here. And it's very expensive. So it's pay now or pay later. Which would you rather pay for? Mental health, offices and social outreach, or profit for, prison things? I can tell you which one I'd rather pay for.
I think we also have to emphasize good jobs and not just redistribution. I think we absolutely need a stronger safety net, and I think absolutely universal health care is essential and would save us money because we just have a middleman ripping everybody else off in the process, and I think we can make similar arguments about a lot of pieces of social safety nets that we need. But I think also there's no reason that we're not talking about good jobs too. You know what I mean? And I think that also I think appeals to some folks who don't like the idea of receiving a handout or paying for a handout. And I think also, the focus on who should be paying, it's the millionaires and the billionaires who should be paying, you know what I mean? And making clear that that's who we think needs to pay, I think is also probably important. Though, I think we need a progressive tax system insofar as we're in this world. The other thing I want to just mention is that, I think it probably makes sense for boys to be taught self-defense, just like I think it probably makes sense for girls to be taught self-defense. And I think that we often don't understand how much violence young men go through just in the process of becoming men. And because it's naturalized, we don't talk about the trauma of that. And then because we don't talk about the trauma of that, we make it invisible. And so I think that I think that that's a really big key gap is we have to talk about the violence that goes on with our boys and the violence that's naturalized that way. That's something that I think, every man I know is carrying and it doesn't really get talked about either. So and that lack of talk about and that lack of care, communicates to men about their status in the world, and their expectations from other people, in terms of what they can expect in terms of support, including against, violence. So I think that's also a piece of the puzzle, there.
The one thing I was going to say on the same topic is that just like in society, we have this individualized context and framework of life. And I'm seeing it more and more in the generation raising children now, like kind of unpacking that within even just like micro moments with child rearing. But it is something that I think in order for us to invest in, public health care, to invest in these things, people have to step away from being like, oh, it's all about me, me, me. I made this money, so I deserve this healthcare plan, but you didn't work as hard as me. You didn't go out and become a plumber, so you don't get to have these things. But instead of like really understanding like this is an investment in your well-being because your neighbor is doing well, then you're going to do well. People think that like these SNAP benefits aren't going to benefit them in a way when around us so many people are utilizing it, and how that's the trickle effect, how that's going to increase our cost for groceries, it's going to increase our cost for other, it's going to increase crime, it's going to increase all these different aspects of it. So I think until that framework is changed, and that's not an overnight picture, it's going to be tricky.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think that's a good way to end. I'm just going to, we talked about gun control in the beginning. The word control has kind of like negative meanings. I know we also talked about protection, safety, defense. maybe these are some words we can think about how we use to communicate ideas that we believe will lead to more protection and safety and security and defense. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time, and I really appreciate everybody sharing their contributions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone have a good day.
Have a
too.
fantastic day. I'll let you know when this
Bye-bye.
comes out. Take care.
Sure enough. Thank you.